Hello everyone. So right now I'm discussing about the optional class inside our Java language. So why Java is introduced the optional class in Java 8 version and what is the purpose of optional class? What we are going to achieve by using optional classes in our day-to-day programming we will try to understand in the today's session. And as well as you know that the importance of optional class nowadays being asked in interviews also, right? So when we will try to understand now, so why people are expecting more knowledge about the optional class and what is the importance of optional class with our in our session we will try to discuss each and every point. Okay, so as part of today's session, the agenda here it is, I'm going to discuss why the optional class is provided and we should understand then the importance of optional class as well as where we are using the optional class, at what scenarios we are going to use the optional classes and every method from the optional class. I will try to discuss each and every method from the optional class and as well as I'll take cover all use cases as well as all couple of examples related to our optional class. So now let's start understanding why optional class is introduced by the Java language. Generally the optional class will be called as a container class, nothing but when we are creating an object. So that means when we are creating an object for the optional, it should contain a value. It should contain a value, or else it should not contain anything. That means empty. But it should be empty or it should contain a value, but it should never contain a value called as something like null. Generally, we know that when we are assigning or when we are creating any variables in our Java language or when you are creating an instances for any data types, what will happen? If you are not initialized any value or if you are not initialized any instance or created instance, then what will happen? The default value for every reference variable of a data types or for our classes, user defined classes or predefined classes will become a value as a null. For example, if I return a class called as one class, and generally what I can do, one equal to null, I can assign like this, right? So here o1 reference variable is not at all assigned with any value. So internally sometimes default will become null or maybe we will initialize null value also. But at the same time, sometimes if I am passing o1 reference to the some other method, if I am performing any operation on the o1 reference object, so that means assume o1 dot any operation, any method I'm trying to call from that predefined class or maybe user defined class, what is going to happen if I'm trying to perform any operation on the o1 reference variable, I'm going to get what? Null pointer exceptions. So we know that whenever I'll just show you a small example also how we are going to get null pointer exception. So here in this case, what we are getting null pointer exception because the wo value here, the wo one value contains null here. So that's why you got the null pointer exception. To avoid this, generally what we will do, we will write always a null checks. So that means we will write down if O1 is not equal to null, then only perform some activity. Then only perform some activity. So that is how we are going to make sure the specify logic implementation here, right? So inside I'll write down the logic now. So here I'll write down the respective logic or something like o1 dot method. So whatever I'm doing here, so that I can avoid the null pointer exception. But these kind of scenarios we are going to encounter on daily basis in our day-to-day programming. And sometimes we cannot expect or we cannot suspect also what value coming or what value is being written from one method to another method, okay, as part of a method parameter values or maybe the return value coming from any other services, what we are going to get. It might be non-null value, it might be null value, right? So in such cases, it's very difficult to handle the null scenarios, and we used to get lot of null pointer exceptions, and those null pointer exceptions are clearly breaking our application functionality, and it is making lot of issues in every day-to-day programming. In every day in a real-time application also. So that's why people will worry more about the null pointer exceptions at one point of scenario. We used to take care of in every scenario when we are defining a value or when we are returning a value or when after return receiving a value also, we will always take care of the null checks to avoid the null pointer exceptions, right? So this will be called as generally null object pattern. So that means you have to take care an object is contains a null value or not. If not contains null value, then only perform the actual operations. If it contains the null value, make sure some other activity or throw some exception like value is not presented or whatever it is. You have to make sure a lot of manual operations. Now by observing all these scenarios, to what Java language is implemented, they given a solution called as optional class. So now the entire solution here it is optional class. Now here you can get what is the meaning of container here it is. Okay, so optional class. And generally people are calling an optional class as a container. So that means it is going to contain a value always. Whenever we created an object for the optional class, we are generally the meaning of creating object for the optional class here it is. And if you observe the optional class from our optional class is introduced as part of our util package. So let me open once optional class. Okay, let me open once the optional class in Java. Okay, so if you see here, this is what the optional class. It is located from the java.util package. And we are going to define an optional object always with a generic type. So we can define with any type. So that means we can define optional values or optional object with by providing any type of values. It might be string data, it might be any other predefined classes or user defined classes data types. Values we can store as part of the optional class. So why it is calling it as a container object? So generally optional is being called as a container object may or may not contains a non-null value. So why it is being called as a container object? Let me give you a small overview here also. So that means when you created an object for the optional class, okay, and you created an object for that respective optional class, what is going to happen? What here it is expecting is it should contain always some value, or else it may contain value, or else it should be empty, but not null value, but not at all a null value should be presented here. We should not maintain null value here. So what it is, we should not keep null values. So that means the optional class is forcing us, the optional class is really forcing us to maintain either a value, that means a non-null value, or an empty, instead of defining null by default. So that what is going to happen in this scenario is when you are trying to extract the original content from the optional class. So here the optional class now is going to return the original value what available inside the optional class. For example, assume I define a optional class with type called as string and I stored my value like I'm just passing a value, my name something like Dilip under. So in this case, the optional is created with data type called as strings and internally you are storing what value? String value. So this is the actual value. Now whenever you are getting a value, so now optional class is providing lot of predefined methods so that we can extract the actual value if it is presented or not. By cross checking if it is presented, we can extract the actual value. So we can extract the content. In case if it is not available, then optional class providing something like we may throw some exception or we may set some default value so that we are In this case, what is happening? We are simply trying to avoid the null pointer exceptions. That's why we can see the optional class introduction level, they definitely provided especially to avoid lot of null pointer exceptions in our day-to-day programming. So that we no need to write down always a null checks when you are using the optional classes. It's all internally forcing us something is missing or it is empty, you may wantedly throw an exception, or maybe you can set a default value when value is not presented. When value is not presented, you can set a default value here. Okay, so let's see how we are going to define optional classes in our programming point of view. How I'm going to handle the null pointer scenarios by using optional classes. First, we will try to produce earlier how we used to get the null pointer exceptions, and as a solution to avoid the null pointer exception, how we are utilizing the optional class in our examples we will see. Okay, so before going into the examples, so I will just give you one more point here. So the optional class is provided multiple predefined static and non-static methods. So every method is having its own importance with respect to our day-to-day programming. So these are all methods we have inside our optional classes. So if you see here, we have couple of methods as a static methods and couple of methods as a non-static methods. So I will try to cover each and every method as part of our session right now. Okay, so we will see every method, don't worry. So now let's start creating a new project and then let's take an examples now. Okay, so see here, I just created an empty project optional demo and I'm creating a class now. So what I'm going to do right now, here it is. So what I'm going to do now, my requirement here it is. Okay, so the requirement oriented I'll try to give you. So I have a string value and I have to convert it always to the uppercase. I have to convert the string value to the uppercase. That is what my requirement. So we have a predefined method to uppercase inside our string class, right? So now let me write down a program for this. Okay, so now I have created a class called as uppercase values. So inside that I just created a main method and I'm going to create one more method, public static string get name. So I would like to get a name from this method always, and I will return uppercase value of this method return value. So let me return a name from here always. So I'll return a name like Dilip Singh here. Okay, fine. So now I'll call this method from my main method. Okay. So see here, string name equal to get name. Right. So then what will happen? This value will be returned to the name. And I'm going to print now sys out of name equal name. Okay. So I will do one more thing. So what I'm doing now, name equal to name dot uppercase. I'm just converting every value to the uppercase. So I'm converting to the uppercase, the received name value and assigning back to the same variable. And then I'm printing this variable. Okay. So just pass it and execute now, run as Java application. Okay. See here, I just given everything in the, I just given in the small letters and capital letters, but everything is converted to the uppercase. Fine. So whenever you are passing any value from here, so you are going to get a uppercase value as part of this line number 9 operation point of view, right? So even you can give anything. So even if you given empty space also, what is going to happen? So let's execute the program. So see here, you don't have any characters, but it is a valid string. That's why you don't get any exception and nothing is converted as uppercase. That's why it is printed again empty string. So if you're passing any values going further, everything will be converted as a uppercase only. Okay. So see here. Yeah. So it's converted as ABC. But what is the guarantee of we are going to get always a non-null value at this method call. So in this method call, do we have any guarantee of getting 100% non-null value? So you have any guarantee? No, because this method may return any value. For example, somehow this method is returning null value. Now what is going to happen in this scenario? Let's see here. Let me execute the same application one more time. So what happened now, understand? You are getting a null pointer exception. Cannot invoke uppercase method of string class with respect to name, because name is a null, name contains a null value here. So what happened here? So you created a string value and you given name as, okay, so it's name. But you received, once you are calling the method, you received what value? Null value. And whenever you are trying to perform some operation on the null value, so something like null dot to uppercase, so we know that whenever we are performing any operation on data null data, we are going to get null pointer exception. So that is what the meaning of null pointer exception here it is. So how can I, so for this generally what we will do as a solution, so I will write down like this as a solution: if name is not equal to null, then perform this operation, name equal to, otherwise just leave it as it is and print the original value as as it is. So see here, now in this case what happened, it's a null value, so you are just return a null check here. Why you return this null check? To avoid the null pointer exception, to avoid the null pointer exception, and program should be executed without any errors or exceptions, right? So that's why you written that. So now you handle the null pointer exceptions. Yes, at one point of time we used to take care of null pointer exceptions by applying the null checks wherever there is a possibility of receiving value as a null instead of actual value. So that is what the meaning of handling the null pointer exceptions or handling our null object pattern. But this might be a problem in every scenario, every class, every method level most of the times. So we have to write down n number of times always a null checks to avoid the null pointer exception, to reduce the null pointer exceptions. So now to overcome these problems only, Java language introduced a class called as optional class. So in this case, what Java is suggesting us, so whenever you're trying to return a result value, for example, here what I'm returning, a value here, right? So I'm returning a string value. So it may be any value going further. So I'm returning what? A string value. So whenever you are returning a value directly, what you have to do is you have to keep the actual value. We have to keep the actual value inside optional object. So that's why optional is called as always as a what? Container object. So that's why it's containing the value, containing the actual value. So that's why it is always called as container object. Now you got the point, right? So why it is optional classes are calling as a container objects. So in this case, what is happening? We have to create an optional object, and inside that we have to keep the actual value, whatever you are trying to return. So that value you have to pass here it is, or else, yeah. So how we are going to pass? Let's see here. Okay. So here generally what you are returning string value, but you should not return the string value. Now what you are going to do? So I'm going to make sure optional, okay, optional dot. Okay, so you know that. So here, whenever we are defining optional class, what data type value, what object or what values you are keeping inside the optional container or optional object, that data type you have to define as part of the optional generic type. So now my requirement point of view, I'm trying to keep string value. So that's why I given generic type as a string. Tomorrow, if you are returning any kind of other data type, something like array list, list, set, hash map, whatever it is, or any predefined classes or user defined classes. So you can define that and you can store that respective instances as part of the optional class. So what I'm going to do now here, optional. So here Java language provided couple of predefined methods to store the value or to put the value inside the optional object. So now in this case, what I'm doing, I'm just keeping a value inside the optional element or optional object. Okay. So what is that value? I'm just storing string value as a Dilip Singh here. And finally, I'm returning what value? Optional data type value from this method. Wherever we are calling this method, go here. So here we are receiving value as a string data type, but actually now getName method is returning what value? Optional type data or optional object. So what you have to do here it is, yes, just define return type with the optional of string only. So now finally getName method is returning what element? Optional element. So in this optional element, what is the value you are having? For example, you created value optional object, right? And what is the value you kept inside that? The string value Dilip Singh. The string value Dilip Singh, here it is. Now getName is returning the same instance, so that name is also pointing to the same optional value. It is what? An optional object. This is all completely an optional object, right? So this is completely an optional object, but inside that you have string data type value. So somehow you have to extract this value from the optional object. Extract value from optional object. So for that, what is going to happen here it is, so Spring provided couple of predefined methods. So what it is, so generally what we did in earlier case, we return null check so that then only we are performing the uppercase method. So we are using what? A operators we are using here. Okay, so we are just using the not operator, equal operators and everything. But here optional class is providing lot of predefined methods. Okay, so to verify whether really value is available or not, or the optional container is having empty, or is it contains any value or not, we have a lot of predefined methods from the optional class itself. So in this case, see here what I'm doing, I'm just removing this logic. Now I'm just rewriting the logic. Okay, so I'll just comment out so that we can see the differentiation also. Okay, so see here, if name is present, so if you see here, so that means name is what? Optional element. So I can, let me modify it as a name container. So now name container is present. There is a predefined method called as is present. So what this method will do, it will verify internally the container, the object, the optional object really contains a value or not. So yes, is it contains? Yes, 100% it is contains. Okay, then it will return the true. So if it is present, yes, then you can perform the rest of the operations. It is checking internally a value is presented or not by using this method. So is present is doing what? The name optional object is really contains a real value or not. Yes, if it is presented, then it will return true. If not presented, then it will return the false. That is what the importance of is present method here it is. Okay. So in case the value is presented, now what it is saying, it is internally verifying the value is presented inside the optional object or not. Yes, it is presented. Then somehow you have to extract this value now. So what you have to do now, you have to extract this value from here to outside, from the optional object to outside, and you have to make it as a string. You can assign it as a string data type value. So why? Yes, you defined optional element with the string data type. So that's why this value belongs to the string data. So to extract value from the optional class provided a predefined method called as get method. So what it is, that get method, name container dot get method. So what is the return type of get method here? String data type, because we defined optional. This optional contains internally string value. That's why it is returning string value always. And observe here, if a value is present, returns the value. Otherwise throws no such element exception. So what is the point here? It is, if value is really presented, then it will return the value. If value is not presented, then it will return the no such element exception. But in this current scenario, we have a value. We are already assigned a value, something like Dilip Singh here. So that you are going to get a value, from the container when you are calling the get method. So what is the value internally? It contains string data type value. So finally get method is returning string value. So assume tomorrow if you are returning optional of employee here, okay, so you are storing some employee object here. So then what get method will return what data type value? Employee data type. So you are going to define employee something like that here. Okay, but in this case, it's all now string values, so that's why I can taken string here. And now see, it's all, the rest is same. Whatever you want to do, name equal to name dot. Here I need to update to the uppercase. Yeah, so let me execute now. So see here, what is the value? It is printed Dilip Singh in the uppercase, but you return optional of Dilip Singh in the lowercase values, but finally it is converted to the uppercase and you achieve the requirement. In it, now you can ask one question, or you may get a question like, so what we achieved from the optional class when comparing with the old solution. So in old solution oriented, you can check only null is available or not. If not available, then perform the activity and then you can do rest of the things. But in optional class, maybe, okay, so in this case it is giving same kind of coding, okay, but in couple of scenarios optional class is providing lot of other options. For example, when value is presented, you can do this thing. If value is not presented, you can assign a default value for that respective, or you can configure a default value inside the optional object. When your value is not presented, you can configure a default value, or you can configure your own value as part of the optional object. Not only that thing, even when value is presented, you can do some of the activities. If value is not presented, you can configure a default value, or you may throw an exception. Okay, whatever the exception you would like to throw, you can throw an exception also. So that means you have a lot of utility methods available inside the optional class. Those utility methods are going to help us to deal with when value is presented, what we have to do, when value is not presented, what you have to do. So those are all scenarios going to be covered by the optional class methods. So now let's see one by one how we are going to deal with optional class predefined methods. Okay, so one more scenario what I'm going to see here. Now total how many methods we have used from the optional class? Here two values. What is that? First one is off method. So why we are using off method? So the off method is always to store value inside the optional object. To configure the actual data type value inside the optional, we are going to use always a method called as off method. So it is going to always providing or configuring a non-null value. I mean, generally you are going to configure always a value by using the off method. So that means you are simply keeping a value inside the optional container. Okay. So, and second method, what you used, you are just cross checking really the container contains a value or not. So if contains, then you are doing the activities, right? So one more method we use called as is present method. Now, for example, now in this case, assume I don't have, okay, let's do one thing. I'll take something like string name equal to, okay, so I'll write down like this. Okay, I'm just passing name here. Okay, fine. So now, for example, sometimes assume name equal to null. Name equal to null. So string value somehow you got as a null value. So then what you can do, you the optional class is always encouraging us, or the Java language is always encouraging us, instead of writing the null values directly, or instead of returning null values as part of the method response return values, what we can do is we can configure an optional with empty we can configure an optional object with empty value. So that means, so see here what I'm going to do in this scenario. So I'll copy paste same example but I will cover one more use case. So see here now. So what I will do now in this case, when name equal to null, so what I can do, I will pass instead of returning null value. So what encouraging here it is, you can pass optional of empty. What it is? Optional of empty. So in this case, when if name is not equal to null, what you are doing, you are just storing optional of value equal to optional dot empty. So what is that value? Optional of empty value you are returning here. So when name equal to null, just return the optional empty. If it is not null, then keep that value again by using the off method. So what you are doing? So I'm just keeping the same value by using again off method. Okay, so I'm just passing value to the optional level. I'm keeping that value inside the optional container. And finally, I'm returning the what? Value. So that means optional data finally I'm returning here. Okay. So let's execute now what is going to happen. Else I'm going to write down. So you know that now is present method is going to cross check internally the container is going to contains a value or not. Now in this case name equal to null. So that's why you are returning empty container. What it is? It's just you are returning an empty container this time. So you're just returning an empty container. So it doesn't contain any value. Okay. So I'm just adding in case value is not presented. I'm just writing a sysout value is not available. Value is not available. So let me execute this example. Okay, so see here value is not available. The reason is what? You are having null, you are returning optional, empty optional. So that's why is present is returns false in this case. So that's why you got else level and this value is printed. For example, if string is contains a value, a string is contains a value, something like Dilip Singh again. Okay, let me execute the same problem. So see here now you got converted value, uppercase converted value as a Dilip Singh only. Right? So this is how the optional class is encouraging us to use always either empty or the value presented optional container objects instead of returning null values. Okay, wherever there is a possibility of getting null values or returning null values, instead of using null returning null values, we can return the optional elements. Okay, so now let's move back to the one more use case or one more method. So how we are going to handle, for example, when optional level value is presented, that's fine, you are able to do something, you are able to do something. Now for example, when value is not presented, then what kind of methods or functionalities provided by the optional class when value is not presented, we will try to see now. So generally, even optional class is provided one more method called as isEmpty method also. So if you see here, I'm using one more method called as isEmpty method. So what is the optional value I received? Container name container here, right? Name container dot isEmpty method. So now tell me, in this case, what is empty in the sense is optional is empty? That is what the question. But this time what? I have a value called as Dilip Singh. So that means inside the optional, I have a value called as Dilip Singh. So it's not an empty. So that means what it will return? Is empty will return. So in this case, is empty is going to return false. False. Is present is returns which value? True, because value is presented. The meaning of is present is in the sense the value is presented. Is empty in the sense is it really empty? No, that's why false. So this is how the is empty is present methods are going to work as a vice versa point of view. So if you see here, I'm just writing is empty. So sys out of is empty is, if it is empty, yes, empty. In case if it is not, else. Okay, then sys out of, see what I'm doing, I'm using name container dot get method. So you know that when value is presented, if you want to extract that value from that container, you are going to use what method? Get method. So I'm using this time get method so that it will return string value, and finally I'm converting to the uppercase. What it is? Uppercase. So this is how you can use the isEmpty method also. It is looks like opposite functionality of is present, but you can verify when optional is empty or not. Okay, so let me execute same example one more time. So see here, second time also what happened? It is printed Dilip Singh. Now let me execute, let me pass a null value here it is. What it is? Null value. Now in this case, what value you are returning? Optional dot empty. So when it comes to here, optional dot empty is present. So what it is checking in this case? Value is presented or not. Value is presented or not. Okay, so is it presented true? No, false. That's why it will come to here value is not available. Now in this case is empty is checking what is container optional, that nothing but optional object is empty, right? So that is what it is checking. Is it really empty? Yes, empty. So then you will see this statement. What you are seeing, you are going to see this statement now. So see here now. So value is not available with respect to is present came to else. With respect to is empty came to the if block only and saying like yes it is a empty container because we are returning an empty optional object. So these are all couple of methods we discussed as of now. So what we discussed here it is was first thing is we are understood what is empty method is doing from the optional class. So it is going to return a empty optional object. That means inside an optional container, I mean we can say like inside container there is nothing. But if you want to keep something, a value, a real value, it might be string value, it might be any value, whatever you defined actually here, whenever you defined optional type and you define whatever the generic type here. So we would like to keep that value. So we are going to use always off method. So when you have a real values, we are going to use off method to keep those values inside the optional. If you don't have anything to keep value, then we have to make sure returning empty optional object instead of the null value, so that whenever any method or wherever you are receiving this optional result, so what we can do, we are going to use these methods, either is empty or is present method. Based on that we are going to define our respective logics. So here the main purpose of optional here it is to return, avoiding the returning null values, as well as we are trying to make sure cross check the null values presented or not before making any activity with the help of optional class. Okay, so not only these are all methods given by the Java language, so even Java is also provided. Yeah, so if you observe here now, so we are completed only couple of method of for return, okay, keeping the value, storing the value, empty for what, returning the empty optional, and we understood now one more method called as get also. So why get method? So whatever you are just storing as part of the off method, so from that optional object, if you want to extract the value, we are going to use always a get method. So it's going to return that respective data type value as a return value, get method. So that is what we used get method also here, right? So it's returning the value what you kept as part of the optional object. If you go to the other methods, okay, we completed is empty so that it is checking really optional is empty or not. So is present is checking internally optional contains a value or not. Okay, so these two methods we are done. Now similarly, let's move to the other methods, why they given, why optional class is having couple of other methods, at what time what other methods we are here to use, we will try to understand now. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take these two methods now and I will explain you at what time you are going to use these methods and how we are going, how these two methods are going to help us when you are working with the optional objects. Okay, so okay, let's define a new class. So now I created a simple Java class. Let me define a optional object also first. Okay, for example, what I will do, I'll just use the existing logic only. So let me copy this value again. Okay, so I just defined one again same method where it is returning depends on the value. For example, I'll keep some value here. First I'm keeping Dilip Singh. Okay, so that means you know that optional of Dilip Singh. So an optional object you are returning and it contains internally Dilip Singh value. Now the method what we are discussing here, this is the method called as if present. So here we are discussing about if present method. Okay, we do have other method called as is present. So we understood is present method in the previous functionality, previous example, like is present is internally checking the value is presented or not. If presented, true. If not presented, false. But here the method this time is if present. So in case value is presented, something has to do. That is what the meaning of it is. Okay. So let me do how it is going to work. Okay. So let's take the optional value. Okay. So string, there is a or something like I can take name container equal to get name. Okay, fine. So here I got the optional element or optional object. Now from this, see the method. If present method is saying you have to define a consumer implementation here. So that means generally the meaning of consumer is what? When we are discussing about the predefined functional interfaces. So consumer is a concept where it is going to take a input value and it will process that input value based on the logic what we define as part of abstract method implemented in the consumer functional interface. And then it will not return any value. Once any kind of logic is applied on the given value, so consumer functionality is saying like it's not going to return any value. So that means if present method is going to return void, because if value is there, something we will write down as part of the if present method. Something has to be done. If and at the same time you are not going to get result back if you are using the if present method. Okay, so see here what I'm doing now. In case if value is presented, take that value, okay, and convert it as, okay, and convert, or I let me do one thing, sysout dot println, and here what I am going to do, the value dot to uppercase. So that means I'm finally converting to the uppercase. So what is my agenda here? It is I'm just, if value is presented, if presented, then the value will be converted to the uppercase and as well as it is printed. So like that you can define any method here. Sorry, you can define any number of lines of logic here. Okay, it's not like only one line of logic you have to implement. Okay, so any number of lines of logic we can define here. So that means the internal value of optional object is converting as a method parameter here for the consumer functional interface, and you are taking that value, you are performing lot of you are performing the logic by on top by using that value, but at the same time this method is not returning any value. It's just performing the activity when value is presented. Okay. So if value is not presented, then it will not do anything. Simply it will come back to the next line. Okay. Similarly, we have another method called as if present or if present or what we have to do. So that is what the meaning of if present or else. So that means the meaning of it is what? If present, do some activity like this. Do some activity for that available value inside the optional object. In case value is not presented, in this case this method is not doing anything, but here this method is helping us. If value is presented, something has to be done. If value is not presented, something has to be done. So that is what the meaning of if present or else method here it is. So see here now what I am doing, optional. Okay, so before discussing about this method, I'm going to execute the program once for the previous if present method so that we can understand if present or else method easily. Okay, let me execute now my application. So see here, you got the uppercase of Dilip Singh. Why? You kept Dilip Singh inside the optional and you return that. So here, really inside optional element, you have a Dilip Singh value. So that's why a value is presented. So Dilip Singh taken and the Dilip Singh is converted to uppercase and printed. So that is what happened as part of this. Now, for example, what I will do, I will make sure this one as a null, string name equal to null. So that means whenever null, optional is what? Empty optional. Optional is a empty optional. So that means, do you think the value available inside the optional object? No. So that means if present internally there is no value, then what is going to happen? So see here now. So yeah, if you see here what happened, you can't see any exception. We don't see any exception. So that means simply if value is presented, something is happening. If value is not there presented, okay, we are not receiving any exception or we are not receiving any errors also. So that is what the advantages of optional classes. Now let's move back to the if present or else. So that means now you can guess with respect to if value is presented, if value is presented, then this is what going to happen. If value is not presented, then what you will do? That is what we have to define. That is what is explaining this method. Okay, let me write down same functionality one more time. Okay, so but here if present or else what you have to do? If present, do something. If it is not there, do something. That is what the meaning of it is. Okay, let me do. So see how many method parameters we have to pass this method. One is consumer. That means when value is presented, consumer logic is going to be executed. If value is not presented, then it is going to execute the runnable activity. Okay. So that means see here how I'm going to write down. Okay. So for example, I'm just writing directly lambda expression notation for the first parameter. So in case the value is presented, so yes, comma, second, in case the value is not presented, runnable activity, 0, okay, 0 activity. So that means in this case what? When value is existed. So here the second method parameter, second param. So what it is saying? So when value is not presented, execute some default logic or something, perform some default activity, whatever it is, I can say. Okay, default logic. So you have to do execute here. So now in this case, what I am doing, same activity, I will try to make sure system.out.println. Okay, so and value dot uppercase. Value dot uppercase. So I'll write down one more statement also. Value presented. So converting to uppercase. Okay, fine. Now, in case value is not presented, that is what talking about the second method parameter. So whatever the logic you have to write down here, you can write down. So see here, sys out value not available. So value not presented. So value not presented. So I'm just returning default value or logic, something, whatever it is, any kind of logic we are going to implement here it is. Okay, so fine. So what we understood here now, if present when value is presented, okay, if or else if value is not presented, then this logic is going to be executed. Now let me execute the same application one more time. So with respect to this line, what is going to happen? You are returning the null. So that means name is null and you are returning optional of empty. So that means value is not there. Then it will execute this line this time. So let me execute now. So see here, value not presented. So I'm just returning default value or something like I'm just going through the default data point of view, we return this statement. So what? When value is not presented. Now what I'm doing, I'm just making again passing a value as part of my string name. So in this case again, what is going to happen? So if value is presented, so then returning the optional of name, right? So this time value is presented. So then what is going to happen? This logic is going to be executed. This first method parameter consumer is going to be executed. So if you don't know more about the consumers, please refer the previous video created for consumer functional interface. So let me execute now one more time. What happened? So this time value is presented, so converting to the uppercase, and the value is converted to the uppercase. Okay, the value is converted to the uppercase. So you got now what are the two methods about the if present and if present or else. So that means simply I can say when optional contains a value, okay, whatever the activity you are doing for that value or with respect to that value, then you can go for the if present method. But your requirement is demanding when value is presented, something we have to do. When value is not presented, something we have to do. Then we have to go with the method called as if present or else method. If present or else method we have to utilize. So when value is presented, the logic whatever you defined here. When value is not presented, the logic what you defined here, everything will be executed. Okay. So this is all about these two methods. Okay. Now let's see the other methods what we have here also. Yeah. So if you see here, we have couple of other methods also called as OrElse, OrElse get, OrElse throw, OrElse throw, something like supplier point of view. So what I will do now, I will try to make sure explaining about these methods, this set of methods one by one, because these are all methods are interrelated. I mean interrelated in the sense we can understand very easily when we are going through the one by one. Okay, and one method is having somehow a relation with the upcoming method with respect to these methods here. Okay, now let's start understanding about these methods also. So here also I'm just creating one more optional demo class. Okay, so to implement those methods, point of view, optional or else methods. Okay, so what I will do here also, I will just try to use the previous logic here also, only getting empty optional or maybe an optional with the value. Okay, fine. Now let me get this optional element in the main method. So optional of string data type, and here name container equal to what? Name container equal to get name. Okay, fine. Okay, so now see the methods what exactly of or method or else method, all these things and all we will try to understand step by step. Okay, first let me go through the a basic theory what a method is doing and all out of these three methods, out of all these methods. Now if you see here what or method is saying, when you are if a value is present, returns an optional again. So that means if value is presented, then it is going to return an optional describing that value. Otherwise, returns optional produced by the supplying function. So that means the method or method is taking a supplier implementation as a method parameter. So that means the lambda expression implementation or maybe the functional interface of supplier, we have to provide implementation for the single abstract method, and that logic is going to be okay returns whatever. I mean that logic is has to return always an optional element. That is what it is saying. If value is presented, the value will be returned as an optional only. If value is not presented, then supplier coming into the picture. Then supplier coming into the picture. So let's see whether it is true or not. Okay, so what I'm going to do now here it is. So that means what R method is saying, the R method, if value is presented, then it will return same object. It will return same optional object. if value is not there, if value is not presented, then supplier functionality will produce another optional with value. So that means simply we have to implement a supplier, and that supplier has to take care of the logic implementation. I mean, returns the optional object in this case. Okay. So I have now what? Name container dot or method I am taking here. Now you know that the meaning of supplier functional interface. Okay. So supplier will not take any input parameters. Supplier will always supply the objects. Okay, but it will not expect any input value as part of the supplier functional interface. Even in previous session I explained very well about the supplier functional interface also, along with the consumer predicate and functional interfaces. Okay, so now let's provide the method implementation of supplier functional interface as part of our method, as part of our method. Here it is. Now see here, supplier, you know that method parameters are always 0 method parameters. So what I will do here, okay, so I'm writing lambda expression notation here also. Return optional of the actual value. For example, I would like to return a value. And then I'm writing a method called as get method. So that means in this case, what is going to happen, guess? If value is presented in this container, you are going to get the same value. If value is not presented, then you are going to get this value, right? So that means what I will do here, it is, I will write in a different value, Java optional value, something like that, Java optional or value, something like that. Okay. So now let me execute my method one more time. Okay. So see here what I am doing. I am returning optional of empty in this case. So first I will execute with the optional of empty. Here I forgot to take something reading or receiving that value, because everything is a string, right? So I just taken the result as a result and I'm just printing now. Okay, so result I have printed now. So let me execute now one more time. So Java optional value. Why Java optional or value? I mean Java optional value or method value. Okay, I'll re-execute one more time. So that means Java optional or method value. Why it is returning? Because optional is empty. It doesn't contain any value. That is what our method is saying. If value is presented, returns the same optional object value. Okay. In case value is not presented, then the optional object, you have to return always an optional object again by keeping some content inside the optional element, optional object level. So that is what supplier functionality is making here it is. So that is what the meaning of it is. So now guess what is going to get here. For example, now again I'm giving value as Dilip Singh. Okay. So in this case, what is going to happen? It contains Dilip Singh and Dilip Singh dot R method. So R will verify value is presented or not. Yes, value is presented this time. So that return same optional object value. So that means it will simply goes to the get method. This logic will not be executed. So that means you get method will return always the value available inside the optional object. So that means Dilip Singh will be printed now. So let me execute now. See here. Now Dilip Singh value is printed here. Okay. So that is how the R method is helping us. So simply R method is producing another optional object with some configured value or configured data or configured objects. Another optional object we are going to receive with our method when value is not presented. When value is not presented inside the optional object. If presented, you are going to get the same value you are going to receive it. Okay. So that is what the meaning of our method here it is. So this value is returned in case value is not presented. If value is presented, then respective value is printed or returned from the get method, Okay, so that is how I can define the R method. Now let's move back to the one more method called as, if you see here, OrElse method, and it is also going to take a method parameter of type. So what OrElse method is saying, so we discussed only R right now. In case OrElse method, so that means, see here, if a value is present, returns that value, otherwise returns other value. So what is the meaning of returns other value? Here it is, let's try to understand. If value presented if value presented, okay, return that value, okay, it is going to return the same value. In case value is not presented, if value not presented inside the optional, then what is going to happen? Here it is, okay, we can configure another value and that will be returned. So that means when value is absent, that means value is not presented, then whatever the value you configured as part of the OrElse method, that value is going to return always. So that means I can say, like, as a kind of backup value or default value, we are going to get when value is really not presented. Okay, so let's see what is going to happen with the method of OrElse method now. So name container dot OrElse method. Okay, so here, see here, string value it is expecting. Why? The reason is name container is of string data type. You are dealing with the only string data type. For example, assume tomorrow you are dealing with the some a user defined object, something like employee object, optional of employee, and you are keeping employee object inside the optional element or optional object, then optional of employee and something like employee container. Okay, so here OrElse method is going to show you as a what employee object you have to store here. You have to store always employee object. So see here what I'm doing. This is OrElse method value. This is OrElse method value. So what is the return type of this method? String. Why? So because the optional internally what type of value you are storing? String value. So that's why that is what it is making. So let me make sure printing result I will reassign one more time so that I already have a result variable, I'm using it. Now guess what is the output you are going to get in this scenario? In the last, what you are going to get? Are you going to get Dilip Singh, or are we going to get a statement like this is OrElse method value? So definitely it is going to return Dilip Singh value. Okay, so let me make sure now. So see here, it is returning the Dilip Singh value because OrElse is saying what? If presented, return same values. If not presented, the value what you configured here, that is going to be returned here. That is going to be returned here. Now let's see here what I'm doing. I'm just making null in the sense empty optional you are returning to avoid the null pointer. So now in this case, OrElse method will verify, okay, optional contains any value or not presented. Then the value point of view, it is going to return into this result variable. So now you are going to get this value in place of absented value, okay, as part of the result level. So let's see now. So now see, this is OrElse method value. So you got the OrElse method now. So you have to understand two things here. The difference between R method as well as OrElse method. So the R method is saying when value is presented, you are going to get the same value again. But when value is not presented, you are returning what? An optional object. You are returning another optional object with some other value. But in this case, they reduced the complexity somehow like that. I can feel, or we can feel, okay, what? Instead of returning the optional object, okay, along with a value like R method, so what these guys are doing, they are directly returning the value, okay, whatever you are trying to extract from the optional object. So they are trying to give always direct a value. Here you are going to get always an optional object. So from that you are calling the getter method. From that you are calling the get method. Okay. But here you are directly getting value. So that means I can consider internally they are calling get method to get the value from the container object of optional. Okay. So that is what going to happen with the OrElse method. Now, similarly, let's understand about the other methods. Okay, what somehow related to the same methods. Now see here, OrElse, get and supplier method. So supplier method parameter. So what is the meaning of OrElse get here? It is if value is present, returns the value. So that means in the last two methods and the current method is saying always when value is presented, it is not going to affect. Okay, those methods are always going to give chance to the available value. So in case the value is not presented, otherwise returns the result produced by the supplying function. So what it is saying, it is somewhat related to our method or not? Yes, looks like, right? So in our method also we have a supplier, but here also we have a supplier. But what is the difference between R versus OrElse get method with respect to supplier functionality? We will try to understand. Okay. So here you are getting optional. Here otherwise returns and a result produced by the supplying function. So what it is and all, let's try to see here. So name container dot which method we are using, OrElse get method. OrElse get method we are going to use here. So I will define the logic. So OrElse get and method with supplier method parameter. So what it was saying, so see here now, it is just saying like value is present, returns the value, otherwise returns the result produced by the supplying function. So that means you have to provide a function here for the supplier functional interface point of view. So you know that again, whenever it is a functional interface, supplier no method parameters. Okay, no method parameters, but you have to return a value here. Okay, so see here, this is OrElse get value. Okay, so that means in this case what you are doing, you are providing supplier function implementation with the help of lambda expression, and you are returning what this time also, this is contains string value, this contains always a string value. So that's why, so our method what it is doing, it's not directly returning the value. Again you are keeping a value inside the optional and then you are returning the optional object. But here this is what doing what, in case value is not presented, then it's returning some other value, it's returning some other value, but with respect to supplier functionality. So generally now it looks like somewhat related to OrElse method also, right? OrElse method also extended to OrElse get method. What is the difference between OrElse and OrElse get method? So OrElse is going to give the another value when value is not presented, right? So in this case also same thing. Then what is the difference between OrElse and get? So here get method is internally using what, a supplier functionality, a supplier method parameter. Generally the supplier behavior is always returning returning, okay, different values at different times. That is what the meaning of, okay, supplier functionality. But somehow we are just hard coded the value, but generally you can define, or you are going to produce randomly a different objects by using the supplier. But here it's just like static, nothing but you're always returning same value or same object or same thing every time. But here as part of the supplier you may produce different objects based on the logic, whatever you return here, whatever the logic you are going to based on that, you are going to return the result here. So it might be dynamic data, dynamic result, always you are going to get the supplier from the supplier, and when you are using with the OrElse get method. So when you have to return always same value, go with the OrElse. Or your value has to return based on the some logic execution. So there might be a chance of dynamically returning the value when value when the actual value is not presented in the container, then it's better to go with or else get method. Okay, so let me show you now. So what I'm going to do, null, right? So that means optional empty. So that means in this case, value is not presented. So then supplier is coming into the picture, supplier is going to be executed and you will see this value. Okay, so let me receive it and let's print one more time, same result, sys out of result. Okay, so let me execute now, run as Java application. See here, this is or else get value. So that means value is not presented. Now let's make some value again here. I'll write down again my value, not here. So let's make a value here. So it's all about Dilip Singh. Okay, it's all about Dilip Singh. Okay, now value is presented. So when value is not presented, there is no use of supplier functionality. I mean, this supplier will not coming into the picture. The existing value will be returned in this case also. Now see, the last line will be printed as Dilip Singh also. Dilip Singh only here also. So that means see here, in three methods point of view, Dilip Singh. Okay, second method, Dilip Singh. Third method also, Dilip Singh. When value is presented, it's not doing anything. Okay. Now similarly, let's go back to the another method. Okay, somewhat related to the OrElse functionality. So what is this OrElse throw method? So what is the meaning of OrElse throw? If value is presented, it will return the value. If in case value is not presented, it is going to throw no such element exception, no such element exception. So that means at what times we are going to use this method is somehow forcefully how to throw an exception or okay, you have to make sure when value is not presented, you have to make sure some exception should be produced. Then you are going to use this method instead of getting default content or default values when value is not presented. So if you would like to throw some exception, see, or based on the requirement point of view, then you can go with this method. So now see here what we are going to do. The next method is OrElse throw method. So just it is going to throw the exception. Okay, so yeah. So here what I will do, name container dot what OrElse throw. So see here, it's not taking any method parameter. Simply it is going to throw an exception when value is not presented. If value is there, then you are going to get that value. So for example, if value is there, result equal to same thing. So sys out of, and let me print result value now. Okay, result, let me print. Okay, so now value is presented so that you will see Dilip Singh. You are not going to see any exception. Okay, fine. So you got Dilip Singh now at the fourth line. Now let me write an null. That means, I mean, I defined null here, nothing but it returning what? Optional of empty. So that means value is not presented. So then it is going to throw some exception now. Now it is going to throw an exception. So this is what the exception you are going to get in this case. Okay, so see here, let me execute now. So what you got at lines at this specific method execution point of view, no such element exception, no value presented, no value presented. Okay, so at that scenarios you have to use this method. See, you have to use all these methods depends on the requirement point of view, what your requirement is demanding. Based on that you have to take. Okay, it's not like fixed places, fixed methods we are going to use always. No, depends on the requirement point of view. So whatever requirement is demanding, is it demanding always a new optional object? Go with the R method. Your requirement is demanding directly a value when value is not presented, then go with the OrElse method. Okay, when your requirement is demanding directly a value, but the value has to be generated based on some functionality always dynamically, then OrElse get method you can go. So if value is not presented, instead of defining a default content or default values or whatever it is, if you would like to throw an exception, okay, to the caller or whatever it is, then you can go for the OrElse throw method. OrElse throw method. Okay, now similarly let's go back to the another method also for the from the same section point of view. What it is? OrElse throw method, OrElse throw method. So in this case also what it is involving? Supplier. So that means here also you are going to get an exception. Okay, here also when value is not there, you are going to throw an exception, but what exception, it's up to your choice. Okay, here always you are getting an exception when value is not there. That exception is always no such element exception. But in this case, you have to throw an exception when value is not presented, and that exception might be anything. It might be no such element exception, it might be a simple runtime exception, that means, or it might be a user defined exception, custom exception, whatever it is, you can throw any exception. That is what the meaning of it is, this method is. Now let's see here, same method execution one more time. So what it is, so or else throw, but method parameter is different with the supplier. Okay, so see here, name container dot or else. So I'm taking this time the second method or else throw method. So what you have to provide, you have to provide an implementation for the supplier functional interface. So supplier will never ever have a method parameter, so that's why you got this. So return new exception. So it is going to, we are going to surround with the try catch clause. So see here now. So in this case, what's happening now this time? If value is presented, it will return the value. In case value is not presented, then it is going to throw a custom exception, whatever you defined here. Okay, this is exception or whatever it is. So this time what exception? It's a simple runtime exception, whatever you want. Okay, even you can write down your own exception, you can return that from here. But in previous case, or else throw is always about fixed exception called as no such element exception, but here anything else. Okay, so no value, something I will write. Now see here, null value. Let me execute what it is throwing, what kind of exception it is throwing. Okay, so for time being, I'm simply stopping this line so that otherwise it will be terminated here itself. It will not reach to the new functionality what we written. So I'll just stop for this, run as Java application. See here now. Now what? You got java.lang.exception and the message is this is exception no value. So that means when you want to define your custom exception when value is not presented, then you have to go with the or else throw method, or else throw method. Okay, so this is how you have to use the or else methods or method functionalities as part of the optional class, depends on the requirement point of view. Okay, so now we are done with the or else all these methods, right? So when value is presented, what to do, not presented, what is the values you have to get and all. Now if you are moving to the other method, we have one called as filter method. The filter method is taking input method parameter as a predicate. So what is a predicate here? Predicate is a functional interface. It is going to discuss all about the conditional evaluation logic. So that means it is always going to take a input value and provide you always a boolean result. At the end it will provide you boolean result. So I explained about the predicate in previous session, please go through it. And now here also, what is the meaning of filter method with predicate functionality? Here it is, for example, assume you got an optional object and you have to extract value from the optional object based on a condition. That means once the condition is satisfied, then only you have to get the value, otherwise you don't want, otherwise we don't want that value. So in such case, what you have to do, generally what we can do optional dot get, then you will get the value, and equal to not equal to, something like that you have to write down the manual logic. But in this case, that is what simplified by the filter method with predicate functionality. So if you see here, if a value is present and the value matches the given predicate, so that means the condition is matching, the value is matching based on the predicate implementation, then returns optional value. That means the actual value what is available inside the optional element, inside the optional object, then only it will return, otherwise it will return empty optional object. Okay, and we will see now how to handle with the filter method. Okay, so let's do one thing. I'm creating a new class again, optional filter method. Let me delete all this. Okay, if you see here, generally I'm using same logic again to get the optional object. So here I will write down optional of string. Okay, you are going to get a name. So I just writing as name container equal to get name. Fine. Now, so see here, I am applying first of all filter method on this container. Filter dot. Okay, if you see here, filter. And what is the implementation you have to provide? Predicate implementation. So how to provide predicate implementation? Let's see here now. So generally predicate will take a value as internally as an input. Okay, let's do one thing. So here you have to provide what? Predicate implementation as part of the filter method parameter. Predicate. Predicate is nothing but a condition. Okay, so you will get a value, and on top of that value you have to apply some functionality. For example, in this case I return string, right? So that's why I'm just making equals ignore case. If it is reaching, I mean matching to the Dilip Singh, then only give me the value. Otherwise don't give me the value. Like that I return a predicate functionality implementation here. So see here now, dot, you can see again filter method is returning back which what? An optional object. So that means when value is really presented, that means in this case what is going to happen here, it is, so if it is, yeah, so in this case what is going to happen, if it is optional element and inside that the value is Dilip Singh, if the value is Dilip Singh, okay, and you are making is it equal to Dilip Singh or not with the condition of filter, and if it is okay, then then only then you can get the value. In case if it is not matching, in case if it is not matching, then I don't want to get a value, or I can return a default value or something like that. I can extend my functionality. So that means filter is just verifying the content of your optional object. So here filter method is we implemented value. What is this value? The value what available really inside the optional object. And that value now you are comparing with a your based on your custom value or custom logic implementation point of view. But finally what it will return? A boolean value you have to return as part of the predicate implementation. So now finally condition became true or the logic implement result given as a true, then it is going to give you the same optional object again. In case if the condition is failing, then what you have to do, what is going to happen? So it will not return. So see here, what I will do, optional of string verified container. Verified container. Okay, fine. So when it is matching, then you will get that back. Okay, now in case if it is not matching, what is going to happen? So see here, let me get the value of verified container now. Verified container dot get method. So then what? It will print the Dilip Singh. When this optional is really contains Dilip Singh. Let me print the value now. If you see here what happened, no such element exception. Why? Because you received an optional, but which optional? Empty optional you got. So that means inside optional you don't have any data. We don't have any data inside the optional. So that's why what it is saying, no such element exception. In this case there is no data, but you are checking with the Dilip Singh. So that's why it is saying like no such element exception. In this case what? No such element exception you are getting. But in case the value is presented, in case the value is presented now, again if I given return Dilip Singh as part of the optional element. So see what I'm going to do now here. I'm giving Dilip Singh. Okay, now in this case, what is going to happen? The Dilip Singh inside optional, what is the value? Dilip Singh is available. But you're as part of the predicate, as part of filter method, you are verifying is it matching to the Dilip Singh or not? Yes, it is matching. So that's why it will give you the same optional object again. So that means same optional object. You are in this case, we return it as a verified container. We are receiving as a verified container. You are receiving it as a verified container pointing to the same option. So that means now see again, you are going to get a value called as Dilip Singh here. Fine, right? So you understood the filter. Condition evaluation is completed. If it is true, then only you will get the same optional, or else it will return no such element exception also. For example, if I'm changing my name as Dilip in the optional level. So now inside optional, what is the value you have? Only Dilip value you have. But you are checking with what? Dilip Singh. You are checking with the Dilip Singh. Then what condition is not matching? Then what is going to happen? See here. Again, no such element exception. Okay. But for example, I don't want to get an exception. I don't want to get an exception in case if it is not matching. But I want to get a default value or some other value. Then what we can do? So like whatever the previous methods we discussed, or method, or else method, all these things, we can apply those methods, continuation or composition to these functionality. So that means because filter method is returning what finally an optional object. So that means we can use the methods what we discussed in the previous class. For example, see here, our method is going to return optional. So that means in case the condition is not matching, I'm going to use again R, and I'm going to produce one more optional object here. So that means what I'm going to do here, it is in case value condition is not matching, then R, I'm returning a default optional object with a supplier functionality. So see here, optional dot of, so some value I would like to keep Dilip Singh at the end. So what is going to happen here, it is I'm writing Dilip Singh here. So now guess what is going to happen in this scenario? What is going to happen? Okay, sorry. Now guess what is going to happen in this scenario? If condition is matching Dilip Singh with actual value Dilip, okay, then you are going to get the filter instance of optional. In case it is not matching, false, then it will reach us to the R, and then you are going to get one more optional object with Dilip Singh, and that is what referred by the verified container. Now tell me in this case what is going to happen. You are going, okay, Dilip Singh of, I can write down a simple differentiation of our method. So now tell me what is going to happen. Dilip is the actual object available inside the optional, but you are verifying with the Dilip Singh. So then no such element. Then immediately, but what we did, we written one more concatenation method called as R method, and I'm saying like in case if it is not existed, return this value. Then it will not throw any exception, like no such element exception in this case. But what you are going to get here, it is now you are going to get a value something like this is the value it is going to get now. So you are going to get output of this value now. So you are going to get this value as a output instead of exception. So see here now, Dilip Singh of R method. Now for example, if I given again Dilip Singh, so then your Dilip Singh internally the value contains what? Dilip Singh. Now Dilip Singh is equal to Dilip Singh. So that means it will return the same optional as part of the verified container. And then you are going to get output as a Dilip Singh. Okay, so that means what is the point I would like to say here, it is you can, based on the conditional result, you can define a default messages, a default optional objects. Okay, in case if it is true same object, we can understand something like that. The value is true, that means condition evaluation getting true, then same optional object. If it is match, I mean condition, yeah, if the condition is false, then you can define the the composite methods of or else, all these things based on our requirement point of view. You got the solution. You got, so we understood. So we got the so we got the fun. So this is how we can use the filter method. Okay, in anywhere else, whenever you want to verify a condition, what is the value available inside the optional level. Based on that, if you want to take a decision, you can use the filter methods also. Okay, so now let's move to the other methods what we are pending from the optional class. So if you see here, we have two other methods called as map and flat map. So what is the map? What is the difference between map and flat map? We will try to understand. First we will discuss map, and then we'll move back to the flat map and we will try to understand the difference between map versus flat map also. Okay, so these are all methods you will encounter in upcoming Stream API concept also. The filter, map, flat map, all these methods are, I can say, like the entire optional class functionalities you are going to encounter in the Stream API discussion also. So that's why please make sure understanding very well of every method so that it will it will become very simple to understand the Stream API also. Okay, so let's move to the map method. What map and okay flat map is doing. Let's try to understand now. So now let's start first with the map method. Okay. So as part of map method, if you observe here, it is taking method parameter, always a function implementation. So we know function is a functional interface given by the Java language. And as part of the functional interface of function, we know that whenever we are passing a value, it will be transformed to some other value and it will return any other data type value based on the logic implementation, whatever it is. So simply, as part of functional interface of function, it takes a value, it will apply some logic on that value, and it may return any kind of other value. Input might be different data type, output might be different data type. Please refer function interface one more time. So in previous session I explained that is also. Okay, so now that means when we are discussing about map, so what map was doing here, and map is returning what again, optional object only. So that means internally what is happening as part of map method, here it is. If you just go through here, if value is presented, returns an optional describing the result of applying the given mapping function to the value. So what is the meaning of applying the given mapping function to the value? Here it is. So that's what I told you. As part of functional interface, what is going to happen in general is, generally whenever you are passing a value as part of functional interface, yeah, if you are taking a value, you will apply some functionality on this. We will apply some functionality, and then what we are going to do is we are going to get a result value. So it might be any other data type. So we are going to get a result value. So that means it might be any data type, not only belongs to the source data type, the target, I mean the resulted data type might be anything also. So taking one value, applying some functionality, and then getting a one more value. So this is what the functional interface is going to do generally. What function interface? Okay, now that means as part of map method, so what is going to happen here? It is, for example, assume I have an optional object and inside that I have a value called as Dilip Singh. Okay, now if you are calling map method, what is this? Optional object, okay, of string data type. So internally you have a string value, right? So that means I told you already, optional can contain any other data type value. It might be other collection objects or any other user defined class object or any predefined object. So we can take anything. Now what map method is going to do, so once you applied map method on the functional interface, okay, map method on the functional interface, so internally based on the above method parameter of function implementation, based on the above implementation, what it is going to do, it is going to pick up the value, it is going to pick up the value, and on top of that value, if you return any, if you return any logic, okay, so if you return any logic, that will be processed, and finally you will get a again what, one more optional object with a resulted value, what, with the resulted values. So again you are getting what, optional object, but this time what is the value of optional object? So here the value whatever you have, so once whatever the logic you applied based on the map functionality, for example in this case assume I applied, okay, this is string value, it is extracting internally string value because string data type, okay, that is also fine. And as well as what functionality I am applying here, it is assume I am applying some uppercase functionality, uppercase functionality, then internally what is the value you are going to see here, it is Dilip Singh. So that means you taken source as optional object with a simple string value, And finally, after applying map functionality, I'm going to implement this logic. We are going to provide as a lambda expression this entire logic. That's why, okay, you are going to get apply this entire logic in the lambda expression of function interface implementation. Then finally, you got an optional object as a result with the applied functionality as captured. Now, if you are extracted value from the optional object, now if you are extracted value from the optional object, what is the value you are going to get here? It is you are going to get finally Dilip Singh in a capital case. Okay, so you are going to get finally as a Dilip Singh. That is how the map method is expecting or map method is doing here. Okay, you got. So that means simple. On high level, take value of optional object, apply some functionality, whatever the implementation we provided, what based on the requirement point of view, and then okay, and then get the optional object with the modified value or the keep that resulted value inside again another another optional object, and finally you are going to get the optional object, right? So this is what map method will do here. Okay, that is fine. So that is what they are saying here now. So if value is present, takes the results, apply the given functionality, and then it is going to apply the given functionality, otherwise returns empty optional. So that means in case the value is not presented in the optional level, so you are going to get what? Empty optional object. For example, if you don't have any value, then you are going to get again optional empty object. That is what they are saying. So if you don't have value, then you are going to get result also a empty optional only. Okay, if you don't have a value, but if you have value, it will apply the functionality. Okay, fine. Now, before going into the programming of map method, let's discuss about the flat map also. It is somewhat related to the map functionality. What exactly the difference between flat map and map, we will try to understand now. Now, for example, if you see here, a value is present, returns the result set of applying functionality, okay, and optional bearing mapping function to the value. So that means it is saying the functionality of what map method is done, that was same thing being done as part of the flat map method also. Okay, otherwise in case if it is empty or whatever it is, you are going to get the empty optional, right? Then what is the real difference between the map versus flat map? So, and if you observe here, this method is similar to map, yes, taking function parameter, okay, but the mapping function is one whose result is already an optional. So that means, and if you invoke flat map, doesn't wrap it within additional optional. So that means what is the point here? It is okay. Let me give you the use case of it is how flat map is going to work. Why they given the name as a flat map? For example, assume in the scenario I have an optional object. Okay, fine. What is this? Optional object. Okay, good. And inside this optional object, assume I have one more optional object. So that means inside optional I can keep any kind of a data, right? So I can keep any kind of data. One more optional object. Okay, so one more optional object. Now in this I have value. Okay, now inside this I have the value called as the Dilip. So it is what? String value. Now in this case, finally I have to extract the Dilip Singh in the uppercase point of view. That is what my requirement. Then what is going to happen here in this case? Tell me. So now what is going to happen if I want to get the value with uppercase value in this case? Can I use map method? So if you are using map method, then what's going to happen? For example, if you are using the map method, you have to do extra logic implementation. So that means if you are using the map, what it will do internally, you will get an optional object, or you just need to first you will extract this optional object. Okay, so you will extract this optional object, and again on top of that, again you have to apply internal mapping, something like that. You are going to get the value of this. Okay, so we are going to get the value of this. You are going to get the value of this. So and then finally you are making the two uppercase, and you are getting the value, the resulted expected result you are going to get in this case, right? But at the same time, why we have to do all this many of operations? So here, as part of the flat map, they are flattening the objects. So what is the flattening the object? Here it is flat. So directly as a nested optional object. So if you observe here, it is all nested objects. So it is all nested optional object. So in this case, what is going to happen? That directly the value will be picked out. Okay, and finally the functionality will be applied. The functionality will be applied, whatever the functionality you want to try, and it is going to get the uppercase. So that means in a simple format, what we can understand here, it is the nested optional objects until reaching to the value, it is just flattening the all optional nested optional objects. So that means until reaching to the actual value, it is just flattening, and finally on top of that value the functionality is applied, and finally you are going to get the result. That is what they are trying to do as part of the flat map. So that is what the meaning of flattening here it is. So they are flattening the nested optional objects. Tomorrow if you have one more optional object inside the this optional, also internally it will flatten. Okay, optional, go to the nested one, go to the nested one, and finally at the end, whatever wherever value is available, so that value will be picked up and the functionality will be applied, and then finally you are going to get the an optional object. Again, whatever the value you are just trying to, whatever the functionality you applied, right, with that you are going to get an optional object again. So you are going to get an optional object, in this case again as a Dilip. So that means at what time you can use the flat map node, guess. So it's all about, yeah. So we are going to use flat map always in a scenario like when you are having nested objects. Yeah, that is the main difference between the map versus flat map especially. Now let's start taking examples about the both methods, how we are going to deal with a simple map method, how we are going to deal with the nested optional objects by using the flat map method. We will try to understand. Okay, so let me define a new class for these two methods, optional map versus flat map. Inside this, what I'm going to do here it is, like say first I will take an optional, okay, object of string value, optional string, okay, so followed by name container equal to optional of value. So we can directly, and this time I'm just directly defining the value inside the optional. So what it is, delete set. Okay, fine. So that means inside optional object, you are keeping string value of Dilip. Fine. Now, I want to get uppercase of value. Okay, with map functionality. With map functionality. So what we are going to do now here it is. So see here, name container dot. What method we are using this time? Map. And as part of map, what you have to implement this time? You have to implement a functional interface of function. So that means generally what functional interface will do, it will take the value. So which value it is? This one. So what you kept inside the optional object level. So that means this is the value. Okay. So you are extracting that value, and on top of that, you have to implement the functionality. Okay, what I'm going to do here it is, I'm just implementing the functional interface implementation, value dot to upper string. So that means, sorry, uppercase. And then what's happening? The result value, you are applying the functionality of converting to the uppercase. So then it will be converted everything in the uppercase. Okay, and that value again keeping as part of the another optional object. So the converted result value you are just keeping again optional object. So that means now map method is returning what? Another optional object with the string value. So if you want to get the resulted value, then you can use the get method. So that means get method is for extracting value of from the optional object. Then get method will give you finally string value. So now this is the value you are getting. It's all string data type value. Now in this case, what it is? String data type value. It's a string data type value. Right? So fine. So now, yes, I will do one thing. String result. Okay, fine. So I'm just printing the value. Okay, so let me execute now. See here. Okay, the value is finally converted as Dilip Singh. Who converted this time? the map method, as part of that, whatever the implementation we provided as a functional interface implementation, that logic. So that means in future, whatever the data type value you are going to get as part of the optional object, you will take that value, whether it is a object or primitive, I mean wrapper value or string value, whatever it is, and whatever the functionality you would like to implement, yes, you can implement that functionality, and whatever the result value is going to come as part of this implementation of lambda expression, that value will be again moved to the a new optional object, and then from there you are getting the actual value which is available in the optional object. Okay, so this is what we discussed in the explanation point of view. So now Dilip Singh, map is going to take the string value. Map is going to take string value because it's a string object. Internally, what we have a string object, and then taking string, converting uppercase. Finally, I mean converted to uppercase and kept again inside the optional object, and finally what the string value with applied logic. Okay, fine. Now it's all very straightforward. Just take the value from the optional object, option from the optional container, apply some logic, and whatever the result it is, you are going to get based on the logic implementation that you map method is going to keep again inside another optional object. And from that, if you want to get the actual value, you can use the get method, or simply you can keep, you will receive a optional element as a result one more time. Okay, fine. So until this, it will return optional object with applied functionality. Okay, now let's move back to the FlatMap functionality, how it is going to work. For example, in this case, I'll give you one more functional intro, one more optional object here. For example, see here, nested optional objects. Okay, so that means what I'm going to do here, it is optional, okay, of optional again. So internally, it is going to contain string value, name container 2 equal to, so I'll just try to make, okay, if you see here, optional of finally string value of string. That means Dilip Singh, whatever I'm writing. So this is how I just created one more optional object, like nested optional object. So the optional object contains one more nested optional object, and internally, finally, the nested object contains nested optional object contains string value. Now finally, I have to extract this value as a uppercase value in this format. Okay, as a result, I want to get uppercase value of this one. So how we are going to traverse from one object to another optional object with respect to nested functionality by using map method? Let's see, understand first. For example, so if you are using map method, what is going to happen? So see here, name container 2 dot, I'm using name container. So if I'm using the map method, so I already explained you as part of map method, what is going to happen? Yeah, it is going to extract first the nested optional object. So that means what? This entire nested optional object will be extracted first. Okay, so what you got here? Optional object. And from that optional object, what it is going to do? Then it is finally reaching to the last optional object in the nested format. Then it is going to get the value from that. So inside this, what is the value? Dilip Singh. Now finally Dilip Singh will be converted to uppercase. So finally Dilip Singh is converted to the uppercase. And whatever the result got to the uppercase point of view, then it is going to keep again inside one more optional object. Inside one more optional object, right? So what it is going to do? One more optional object. Then finally you are calling the get method. Okay, externally we are calling as a developer get method. Then finally you are seeing the result as Dilip Singh. What it is? The result as in the uppercase format Dilip Singh. Okay, finally you are calling get method and you are seeing the result as Dilip Singh. Okay, so now let's start programming point. So what I'm doing, I'm just taking a map method here so that the previous functionality. So as part of map, first we will get this object. Okay, if you taken the value, so this value will return what? This object. Okay, value dot get. So then what you're getting again, you are getting the optional of string. Nested optional object. Okay, so then from this nested optional object, so you just make sure, I think you can do this activity. So what I'm doing, result nested optional object of container and then map and uppercase. Now convert it again. This out it off. I mean, now I'm just printing the result. So what we did here overall, so okay, if you see here now, the output, you got output of Dilip Singh. So what happened in this case, what we are doing, especially just try to understand. So we have nested. So first map is doing extracted the nested optional. And again, on top of that, one more time, you're doing the map and you're doing the get end, right? But if you are using the flat map in this scenario, you no need to write down of this extracting nested optional objects and finally extracting the actual original content. I mean, and finally extracting the content of the optional object and finally performing the operation, whatever you are just trying to do here, right? So instead of writing this extracting nested optional objects and finally making the mapping functionality, so what FlatMap is doing here it is, so FlatMap is going to flatten the optional objects. What is the meaning of flattening the optional object? Here it is. So that means internally what these guys are doing, it is going to directly pick up the value. Directly it is going to pick up the value of Dilip Singh. And then the actual mapping functionality, whatever we implemented, that is going to implement it on this actual value level directly instead of traversing through the nested optional objects. So that means directly picking the value of nested, it is just traversing and getting the value and just apply the functionality, whatever we are trying to make the functionality. And finally, you will get a result. So see here how the flat map is going to work. Now, same container object I am taking with respect to flat map, how we are going to implement the above functionality. So see here, flat map, what functionality you have to do? You are doing same functionality. I mean, upper converting finally Dilip Singh to the uppercase. Now in this case, so see here, okay, so what you are doing, extract the value. So what value? String value. Okay, then finally you will get a value and then to uppercase. To uppercase. So in this case, what we did, it's just internally with respect to this, you are just flattening the optional objects. This operation is doing flattening all the optional objects, and from there finally you are getting the value. Which value you are getting here? Dilip Singh. So here it is just flattening all the objects in this area, and finally you got the value, and then you are converted to this, and then you are going to convert it to this. Now what is the result of this? String value, right? So result equal to same sort of result. So see here result. Now let me execute this example one more time. So if you see here, you got again Dilip Singh on it. So that means very less amount of code we return. We don't need to extract nested optionals and everything. Simply what it is doing, whenever you are having nested optionals, it is going to flatten with this operation. Okay. And then finally going to pick up the value of the actual content, and then it is going to apply the functionality. Okay, so this is all about the flat map method. Especially flat map is usable when we are having nested optional objects. Okay, so that's all about the optional class and the methods available inside the optional class with respect to static and default methods. Okay. Yeah. Now in the next session, I'm going to discuss about the stream API. So the stream API is more popular concept nowadays, we know that, and as part of stream API, definitely we should know the previous concepts like functional interfaces as well as predefined functional interfaces as well as optional class, all this information. Okay, yeah, so I will upload all these examples on the GitHub account. Okay, so if you want, you can get code from there also. So thanks for joining and thanks for watching, and please subscribe.